A Jamaican Police Story, Season 1. Babylon in a Fire. Episode 1, Righteous Wolves. Kingston, Jamaica, the streets where truth and shadow move together, indistinguishable until one draws blood. The ground and the graves beneath it. Crescent Pen, before the body. Before the blood dried black on the red clay behind a house of God. Before the guns, before the lies dressed up in three-piece suits and sanctified linen, before all of that, there was a mourning. The kind of mourning that only Jamaica knows how to make. The kind that tricks you into believing, for exactly 17 minutes, that the world is generous and good. The sun came up over Crescent Pen district the way it always did in August, not gently, not with any particular mercy, but with the full and absolute authority of something that answers to nothing and no one. It came up red at first. Red over the blue mountains in the east, red washing the corrugated zinc rooftops, red burning the morning mist off the banana groves that climbed the hillside behind the district in long, trembling rows. And then it turned gold. Now, you must understand what Crescent Pen is before we go any further. Because a place has its own kind of character, same as a person, and if you don't know who you're dealing with from the start, you will misread everything that follows. Crescent Pen is a district in the parish of St. Catherine, Jamaica, though some say the heart of it belongs to nowhere but itself. It sits in that complicated geography between the corporate area of Kingston and the quieter inland parishes, close enough to the capital to feel its ambitions and its cruelties, far enough removed to have grown its own particular culture, its own rhythms, its own long memory. The district takes its name from the old cattle pen that once bent in a crescent shape along the southern ridge, long gone now, the land long subdivided, built over, sold, resold, disputed in court, and decided in the street. What remains of the crescent is only the shape of the main road as it curves through the heart of the community, one long, slow arc, lined with rum bars and Chinese shops and a hardware store that also sells lottery tickets and ice and phone credit. Because necessity is the mother of every kind of invention in a place like this. About 4,000 people call Crescent Pen home. Some of them have lived here since before their grandparents can remember. Some of them arrived in the last 20 years chasing work, chasing a cousin's promise, chasing something they couldn't name. The district has a primary school painted yellow and green, the national colors, and a health center that is open 4 days a week, if the nurses don't have union grievances. It has 2 churches, or rather, it had 2 churches until Pastor Conrad Levy built the third and largest one on the hill 4 years ago, the one they call New Jerusalem Tabernacle, with its white walls and its red roof tiles visible from half a mile in any direction, gleaming in the sun like a crown or a warning. It has a market on Saturdays. It has a standpipe at the corner of Redemption Lane and Mango Walk that functions most of the time. It has a small police post, really just 2 rooms and a ceiling fan, staffed by 1 resident constable and visited twice a week by a patrol unit from the main station in the next town. And it has Brother Marcus Tafari's herb farm. The farm sits on 3 acres of gently sloping ground on the northern edge of the district, where the soil runs deep and dark and the rain comes in reliable sheets between May and October. Marcus has worked that land for 39 years. He grows culinary herbs, thyme, escallion, mint, morena, and also, in a carefully maintained section licensed under the medical cannabis provisions that came in through Parliament 11 years ago, a modest plot of marijuana. Legal. Documented. Inspected twice annually by the Cannabis Licensing Authority. His is the kind of farm that keeps things honest. Every plant numbered. Every harvest logged. Every gram accounted for, because Brother Marcus Tafari has known since he was a young man that the only power a black man has against a system designed to grind him down is his own unimpeachable record. His own clean hands. He learned that the hard way. But we are not there yet. This is before the body. This is the morning, that gold-washed, bird-loud, wood-smoke-scented morning, and Brother Marcus is already in his field at 5:30, his locks tied back with a strip of red cloth. His hands moving through the herb rows with the certainty of a man who has done this so many thousands of times that his hands know the work without asking his mind for directions. The sound of his farm in the early morning, the soft percussion of a hoe against earth. A rooster, not his, a neighbor's, announcing himself from somewhere behind the fence line. The liquid three-note call of a solitaire bird up in the tree at the field's edge. The distant, muffled thump of a sound system still playing from the previous night, somewhere further down the district, bass frequencies carrying further than any other sound, arriving without context, just the heartbeat of something that has not yet gone to sleep. And in the doorway of the small wooden house at the edge of the farm, Marcus's granddaughter Kezia stands with a mug of cocoa tea in both hands, watching her grandfather work. She is 19 years old. She has her grandmother's eyes, wide, very dark, capable of a stillness that unnerves people who are accustomed to young people being in constant, restless motion. She is wearing a school uniform. The school doesn't start for another hour because Kezia is the kind of young woman who prepares early for everything. She is watching her grandfather, and her face carries an expression that, if you knew what was coming, you would recognize immediately as the look of someone who already knows something terrible is close, but does not yet know exactly what shape it will take. Now hold that image. Hold the gold light and the old man's hands in the herb rows and the girl with the cocoa tea and the faraway bass. Hold it, because we are about to leave it behind. Scene 2. Detective Corporal Nadine Campbell. 40 minutes across the parish, in a third-floor office at the subdivisional headquarters in Portmore, Detective Corporal Nadine Campbell, called Nikki by everyone who knew her, and called nothing at all by the people who feared her, was already at her desk. She had been there since 5 o'clock. The office smelled of old paper, cheap disinfectant, and the ghost of someone else's cigarette. The ceiling light flickered on its last leg, throwing unsteady yellow over a desk stacked with manila folders, a computer terminal whose fan hummed like an anxious thing, and a corkboard on the wall behind her chair that was dense with photographs and strings of red thread connecting points of interest the way certain kinds of minds work, not linearly, but in webs. Nadine Campbell was 34 years old. She was not a tall woman, but there was a quality of compression about her, the sense of something larger than her frame carefully folded down to fit inside it. She wore her hair natural, pulled back tight. Her face was her mother's face. High cheekbones, dark brown skin, a mouth that could be generous when she let it, but which, at work, she held in a straight, considering line that people often mistook for coldness. It was not coldness. It was attention. She had grown up in Arnett Gardens, one of the hard yards of Kingston, the kind of community that Jamaica produces people from, extraordinary people, and then spends considerable energy pretending those communities don't exist. Her mother had raised 3 children in 2 rooms on a seamstress's income. Her brother Devin had been 22 years old when he was shot dead in a case that was never meaningfully investigated. Never. The file sat somewhere in a records room, probably misfiled, probably incomplete. Devin's death was why Nikki had joined the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Not for the salary, which was modest. Not for the prestige, which was complicated. But because she had stood at her brother's graveside in Arnett Gardens on a Tuesday morning in November, 12 years ago, and made herself a promise that she intended to keep for the rest of her working life, that she would be the detective she and Devin had never had. She was good at it. Exceptionally good. She had closed cases that her colleagues had written off. She had walked into communities where the police were hated rightfully, often, and earned enough trust, over time, to make people speak to her who spoke to no one else in uniform. She had a gift for the invisible architecture of a crime, the structure beneath the surface, the logic connecting things that looked disconnected. She had also, 3 times in 6 years, had a case pulled out from under her by superiors who had interests in keeping certain things buried. She understood, by now, what that felt like. The way a floor gives way under your feet. The moment when you realize the building was rotten from the inside. She had never stopped. This morning, she was reviewing a file on a series of firearm seizures in the parish, unregistered weapons, mostly handguns and 1 semi-automatic rifle, recovered in 3 separate incidents over the past 8 months, with no clear origin trace. The guns were American manufactured. The serial numbers on 2 of them had been filed off, but not carefully amateur work or work done in haste, and the manufacturer's internal code, the hidden secondary identifier embedded in the metal, had survived on 1 weapon and been partially recovered on another. Both traces pointed to the same original purchase. A licensed firearms dealer in Hialeah, Florida. She had circled that in red pen and was now looking at it the way she looked at anything that didn't fit cleanly, not with surprise, but with the measured focus of someone who knows that the one thing that doesn't fit is usually the one thing that explains everything. Scene 3. Fabian Morris and what he wanted. Detective Constable Fabian Morris arrived at the office at 7:45, which was on time by any reasonable standard, though not by Nikki's. He came through the door the way he always did, fast, slightly breathless, carrying 2 styrofoam cups of coffee from the vendor downstairs and wearing an expression of eager readiness that, on his worst days, Nikki found exhausting, and on her best days, she found quietly endearing. Fabe was 29 years old. He had been her partner for 14 months. He was a young man from Mandeville, the orderly, cool climate hill town in Manchester Parish, and he carried that geography in him. He was accustomed to a certain kind of civic order that Crescent Pen district and its complications had been slowly, systematically dismantling his sense of. He was not a foolish young man. He was smart, and he was brave in the physical sense. He had run into situations that more experienced officers had pulled back from, and he had been right to do so mostly. But there was something in him that had not yet been fully tested. A place in his moral architecture that remained untried by the specific and intimate temptation that only corruption can offer, not the crude bribery of a man waving cash, but the slow, sophisticated seduction of a system that tells you that survival requires compromise, that everyone does it, that the alternative is poverty and powerlessness and being eaten alive by the very thing you're supposed to fight. That test was coming. Sooner than Fabe knew. "Morning, Corp," he said, setting a cup on her desk. "Anything move overnight?" Nikki looked at him over the file. She told him what she'd been looking at: the guns, the American trace, the dealer in Hialeah. She watched his face as she spoke. She always watched faces. She noted the slight upward twitch of his left eyebrow when she said the word Hialeah, not suspicion on his part, just surprise, and she filed it. Fabe pulled up a chair and leaned in, and for the next 20 minutes, they worked together the way a good partnership works, not one person leading and the other following, but 2 intelligences moving around the same problem from different angles, covering each other's blind spots without being asked. It was, for those 20 minutes, a good morning. Then Nikki's phone rang. Scene 4. What they found behind the church. The call came from the resident constable in Crescent Pen, a young man named Constable Pert, who had been stationed there for 7 months and was still, in the way of genuinely conscientious young officers, trying to do the job correctly. He had found the body at 6:40 in the morning. Or rather, he had been found by it, in the sense that when you are walking your routine morning patrol through a district and you turn a corner behind a large white church with red roof tiles and discover a man lying face down in the red clay, 8 feet from the back wall, you do not so much discover the body as the body announces itself to you. The man's name was Desmond Taylor, known in Crescent Pen as Desi, 26 years old. A resident of the district all his life, born there, schooled there, working there in the informal economy that most of the district sustained itself on. He had, at various points in his adult life, sold produce from a cart, fixed motorcycles in a yard on the back road, done casual labor for a contractor, and this part was known to Constable Pert, if not provable. Run ganja for a distribution point that operated out of a rum bar on the curved main road. Desi Taylor had been shot twice. Once in the back of the left knee, a wound that would have dropped him immediately, would have put him face down in the clay exactly as Constable Pert found him, and once in the back of the head. Execution style. The kind of thing that isn't done in the heat of a fight or an argument that escalated. The kind of thing that is done by someone who has already decided, who has come with a purpose. He had been there several hours by the time Pert found him. The ants had already begun their work, indifferent and thorough, the way the earth always is about reclaiming what belongs to it. He was wearing a white t-shirt with a lion's head printed on the chest. One of his shoes, a blue rubber slipper, had come off and lay 3 feet away, as though the force of his falling had flung it free. That detail, the single slipper, lying alone in the red dirt, was the thing Nikki kept coming back to when Constable Pert described it. She couldn't have explained, not precisely, why that detail hooked her. But in 12 years of detective work, she had learned to trust the things that hooked her. Behind New Jerusalem Tabernacle, she said. Pert confirmed it. New Jerusalem Tabernacle. She wrote the name on a fresh page of her notebook, underlined it once, then looked at the firearms file still open on her desk, the guns, the trace, the Florida dealer, and underlined it again. She and Fabe were on the road to Crescent Pen within 11 minutes. The drive took 45 minutes on roads that the last government had promised to repair and the current government had also promised to repair and which remained, in the meantime, a sequence of craters and patches held together by ambition and good fortune. The Toyota Corolla that the subdivision had assigned to their unit had seen better decades. Its air conditioning had surrendered 2 years ago. Fabe drove with the windows down. The August morning already thickening into heat, the air smelling of cut cane from a field they passed, and then, closer to Crescent Pen, of wood smoke and salt and the organic, layered earth scent of land under cultivation. Nikki rode with her notebook open on her knee. She said very little on the drive. She was the kind of person who thought loudest when the world went quiet, and Fabe had learned this about her, that her silences were not absence, but occupation. She was somewhere inside the problem already, moving through it, testing walls. When they reached Crescent Pen and the Corolla crested the last hill before the district opened up, Nikki looked out the window at the white church with its red roof tiles on the hill, visible exactly as she had been told, from half a mile in any direction, gleaming in the hard August sun, and she felt something clarify in her, the way things do when a new fact snaps into alignment with what you already suspected. She did not know, not yet, what all of it meant. But she knew, with the bone-deep certainty that had guided her across 12 years and 3 pulled cases, that Desmond Taylor's body had not ended up behind that particular church by accident. Nothing in Crescent Pen District was an accident. Everything here was by design. Act 2. The Architecture of Respectability. Scene 5. Brother Marcus and What Grows in the Earth. The crime scene behind New Jerusalem Tabernacle was processed with the resources available, which is to say, a photographer from the division, Constable Pert, Nikki and Fabe, and a medical examiner who arrived an hour late and was visibly operating on 3 cups of coffee and insufficient sleep. The scene was cordoned, photographs taken, measurements recorded. Desmond Taylor, Desi, was lifted from the red clay and placed in a body bag with the careful, impersonal efficiency that death administration requires. The single blue slipper was photographed in place, then bagged. Nikki walked the perimeter of the church grounds twice before she said anything to Fabe. The church was enormous by any parish standard, a main hall that could seat 700, with 2 overflow wings under construction, and a parking area paved with concrete blocks where on Sunday mornings you would find minibuses and private cars and, occasionally, the kind of large 4-wheel drive SUVs whose presence in a working-class district required explanation. The rear of the building, the wall against which Desi had fallen, had no windows, no cameras. There was a storage annex against the back wall, padlocked. Nikki noted the padlock. A heavy-duty padlock, relatively new, the kind that costs real money and signals that what's behind it has been deemed worth the investment. She noted it and moved on. She could not open it without a warrant, and for a warrant she needed probable cause she could document. She filed the padlock in the same place she had filed everything else, the active, urgent part of her mind that was still assembling the shape of this thing. It was during her second circuit that she noticed the farm. Brother Marcus Tafari's 3 acres sat less than 200 meters from the rear of the church, separated by a chain-link fence and a row of breadfruit trees whose branches reached over the fence line in both directions, indifferent to the demarcation of property. The farm was orderly in the way of something that has been tended by the same pair of hands for decades, not the sterile uniformity of industrial agriculture, but the lived-in organization of a man who knows exactly where everything is and why it's there. The proximity caught her attention immediately. She found Brother Marcus in his field at just past 9 in the morning, still working, still moving through his rows with that unhurried authority she would come to recognize as his characteristic mode, a man who has decided, long ago, that the quality of his attention is the only thing he fully controls. He was a tall man, angular, his skin the deep mahogany of someone who has spent most of his life outdoors. His locks, 37 years grown, he would later tell her, were wrapped in a cloth of green, gold, and red. His hands were enormous. He saw her coming and stopped. He rested his hoe against the fence post and waited. She introduced herself, showed her credentials, watched his face as she told him what had been found behind the church. Brother Marcus Tafari's face when he heard about Desi Taylor, that is something worth describing carefully. It did not go through the usual sequence that civilians' faces go through when confronted with violent death in their immediate community. The surprise, the recoil, the performance of shock. Instead, his face went through something else. Something older and more knowing. His eyes did not widen. They deepened. "Desi," he said. Not a question. A recognition. He said it the way you say the name of someone you have been quietly, privately worried about for a long time. Nikki asked him if he had heard anything unusual overnight. He was quiet for a moment. He told her he was a sound sleeper, his granddaughter, Kezia. She kept the later hours. She would hear more. He told her that in the past 3 months he had noticed, on 2 occasions, vehicles on the back road behind his farm at hours when no vehicle had any business being there past midnight, once close to 2 in the morning. Large vehicles, from the sound of the engine. Going slowly. "You reported it?" Nikki said. Brother Marcus looked at her with the patient, undramatic patience of a man who has spent 67 years accumulating evidence about how the world actually works. "To who?" he said. And in the pause that followed that question, a question that was not rhetorical but genuinely, practically asked, Nikki understood something about Crescent Pen district that confirmed everything she had already suspected. She left Marcus with her card and the instruction to call her directly, at any hour, if he remembered anything else or if anything changed. He took the card with both hands, in the old way, a gesture of respect that in Jamaica is almost unconscious, almost liturgical, and he looked at her name on it for a long moment before tucking it into the breast pocket of his work shirt. As she walked back toward the church, she heard him say, quietly, almost to himself, in the particular way that Rastas will sometimes speak scripture or truth to the air around them. "Jossie and no." She kept walking, but she heard it. Scene 6. The paper trail that goes somewhere inconvenient. It took Nikki 4 days to get the shipping manifest. 4 days of calls, of bureaucratic patience, of the particular diplomatic persistence required of a detective who knows that the answer is in the paperwork, and that the paperwork has a way of developing legs and walking away if you are not careful. The manifest came from the Jamaica Customs Agency. A logged shipment arrived at Kingston Wharf 9 months prior, declared as church audio equipment and musical instruments, for large crates, shipped from a freight forwarding company in Miami, Florida. Consigned to New Jerusalem Tabernacle, Crescent Pen District, St. Catherine Parish. Now, you must understand that this, by itself, was not unusual. Churches in Jamaica receive equipment from abroad with some regularity. There is a long and genuine tradition of diaspora communities shipping supplies home to their congregations, of American-based Jamaican churches partnering with island branches, of the kind of transatlantic religious generosity that is entirely authentic and entirely common. What was unusual, what made Nikki sit very still in her chair and reread the manifest 3 times, was the shipping company. The Miami Freight Forwarder. She ran it. It was registered to a holding company. The holding company pointed to a shell entity incorporated in Delaware. The Delaware entity had, as its registered agent, a name. The name was not Pastor Conrad Levy. It was a woman named Sandra K. Levy, his sister. And Sandra K. Levy, when Nikki ran her through the combined database, a process that required 3 separate system logins because the JCF's information infrastructure was held together with what one might generously describe as institutional optimism. Sandra K. Levy had a prior arrest record in Broward County, Florida. Possession with intent to distribute. Charges later dropped. But the connection between the church, the sister, the freight company, and the guns traced to a Hialeah dealer, Hialeah, which sits in Broward County, where Sandra K. Levy had been arrested. That connection. That is not coincidence. That is architecture. She brought what she had to Superintendent Rohan Bent that Thursday afternoon. Superintendent Bent occupied the corner office on the 2nd floor with a window that looked out over the car park. He was 58 years old, a large man, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had once been commanding and was now settling into something softer and more guarded, the way faces do when the primary occupation of a life becomes concealment. He had been in the force for 33 years. He wore his uniform with the ease of something that has become a second skin. He listened to Nikki's findings with the attentive, measured expression of a man who is very carefully deciding what to show on his face. When she finished, he was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said the church angle was sensitive, that he would need to make sure the approach was proper. That Pastor Levy was a pillar of the community. She knew this, of course, and that accusations or even investigative attention directed at a man like that, without ironclad cause, would create serious institutional and political problems for the division. "I'm not accusing," Nikki said. "I'm following a paper trail." "Follow it carefully," Bent said. It was the particular delivery of those 3 words, the weight in them, the specific color of his voice when he said them, that told Nikki everything she needed to know about Superintendent Rohan Bent. Not what he said. What he meant underneath it. She walked out of his office and back to her desk and sat down and looked at her corkboard and began, quietly, methodically, without announcing it to anyone, to build a second version of the case. One that she kept in a notebook that never left her person. One that she did not put into the system. Because some truths, you learn, cannot be trusted to the house that is supposed to be their home. Scene 7. The bribe and what it tasted like. The approach to Fabe came on a Friday evening, 8 days after Dessie Taylor's body was found. It was handled well. It was not done crudely, no envelope slid across a table in a back room, No man in a gold chain and a tracksuit appearing at his apartment door with a package. No. The approach to favour was done the way experienced corruption always operates, through familiarity, through warmth, through the natural channels of community and church. It came through a man named Deacon Neville Ramsey. Deacon Ramsey was 44 years old and was, by every external measure, a good man. He coached youth football at the community center on Wednesday afternoons. He organized the food bank distribution for New Jerusalem Tabernacle 3 Saturdays a month. He was, by his own account and by the account of everyone in Crescent Pen who knew him, and most of them did, a man of genuine faith, genuine service, genuine community love. He was also the man whose name appeared on the import documentation for the 4 crates of church audio equipment that had arrived at Kingston Wharf 9 months prior. Whether Deacon Ramsey knew what was in those crates, whether he had signed the documentation with full knowledge, or whether someone had used his name and his goodness as a signature on something terrible, was a question that Nikki had not yet been able to answer. But Deacon Ramsey knew Fabe's family. Knew his father, specifically. A connection from years back, a church-going family from Mandeville, and the deacon had connections in Manchester Parish through the wider reach of New Jerusalem's congregation. And so it was natural, or made to seem natural, that when Fabe stopped at a gas station in Crescent Pen on that Friday evening, Deacon Ramsey was there, filling up his van, and they spoke the way two people from overlapping worlds speak when they happen to meet. They talked for 20 minutes. The deacon was warm, easy, generous with his time. He asked about Fabe's father. He asked about the work, genuinely, or so it felt. He said that the investigation must be hard, that young men dying was a grief to the whole community. And then, as Fabe was about to leave, the deacon said something that stilled the air between them. He said he had friends who appreciated the difficulty of the work these detectives were doing. Friends who were good people, community people, who would like, one day, to have the opportunity to say thank you in a meaningful way. That was all. Just that. Nothing more explicit. Nothing that could be quoted in a tribunal. Just the door, opened precisely 2 inches. Just the warmth of the invitation hanging in the Friday evening air like incense. Fabe drove back to the subdivisional headquarters and sat in the car for 8 minutes before going inside. He told Nikki. He told her that night at her desk in the half-empty office with the flickering ceiling light and the corkboard full of red thread. He told her, and she listened without interrupting and without the expression of either relief or surprise that he had perhaps expected. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good." That he told her. She said, "Keep the door open. Don't close it. Don't accept anything, but don't close the door. Let them think you're considering it." She watched his face when she said that. She was asking him to walk a line she knew was uncomfortable. He said, "All right." And the way he said it, not easily, not with bravado, but with the specific gravity of a young man who has just understood something about what this job is going to cost him, told Nikki that Fabe Morris was going to be all right. Eventually. Scene 8. The rally, the councillor, and the pastor. The Saturday of Councillor Yvette Drummond's re-election campaign launch was a spectacle that Crescent Pen District had not seen in 4 years, since the last local government election, when she had won her seat by a margin that she described as a mandate and that her opponents described as several other things, none of them printable. The venue was the car park of New Jerusalem Tabernacle. Of course it was. The car park had been transformed, tents in the constituency colors, a platform stage with a lectern and a banner that read, "Drummond, Clean Community, Strong Future." A sound system, a modest one, community scale, not a dance hall rig, but substantial, played gospel music and then soca and then, as the crowd grew, reggae. The smell of jerk chicken from two-barrel drums at the edge of the car park, of frying festivals, of sweet potato pudding in foil trays. Children ran between adults' legs. Old women sat in folding chairs under a tent drinking sorrel from styrofoam cups. Young men from the constituency stood at the perimeter in clusters, some of them watching the stage, some of them watching each other, the way young men in constituencies watch each other at political events, with the alert, calculating attention of people who know that politics and power and who controls what territory are all the same conversation conducted in different registers. Councillor Drummond arrived at 11 o'clock in a white SUV. She was 47 years old, and she was, and this must be said with precision and without irony, genuinely, unmistakably impressive. She was a woman of medium height with close-cut natural hair and the kind of physical bearing that announces itself before the words begin. She wore white, a deliberate choice. You understood immediately. White in the political context, purity, cleanliness, the clean community of her banner. She had been a primary school principal before entering politics. She had, in 8 years as a councillor, built a health clinic, secured funding for road repairs in 3 communities within her division, and established a scholarship program that had sent 11 young people to UTech and UWI. These were real things, not propaganda. Real things that real people in her constituency could point to and touch and say, "This happened. Yvette did this." This is what made Councillor Drummond, in Nikki's estimation, the most complex and therefore most dangerous of the 3 people she was beginning to understand sat at the center of whatever was happening in Crescent Pen district. Because Pastor Conrad Levy was a predator in clerical clothing, and predators, ultimately, can be understood. And Superintendent Bent was a man who had made his choice and gone to sleep inside it, and compromised men can be traced. But Yvette Drummond had made herself believe that what she was doing was ultimately, cosmically, in the community's interest. That the money that funded her campaigns, that came from a ganja network that Brother Marcus Tafari knew nothing about, that ran beneath his legal farm like a second river underground, that money, in her telling of her own life, was seed money for the clinic and the road and the scholarships. That the harm it caused somewhere else, to someone else, was a mathematical tragedy she had decided she could live with. Now, you must understand, people who believe they are doing good are vastly more dangerous than people who know they are doing evil. Evil that knows itself is at least predictable. Evil that has wrapped itself in conviction, that is the thing that corrupts entire systems, entire generations. Pastor Conrad Levy took the stage before the councillor. He introduced her. He called her a daughter of the community. He quoted, and this is worth noting precisely, he quoted from the book of Proverbs, "She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness." The crowd applauded. The women under the tent smiled and nodded and felt the warm affirmation of Scripture applied to a woman they respected. Pastor Levy was 52 years old and wore a charcoal gray suit that had been cut in Kingston by a tailor who understood that clothes are a form of communication. His face was full, handsome in the way of men who have never been denied very much and have arranged themselves accordingly, an easy smile, a sure voice, the physical confidence of a man who has never stood in a room and wondered whether he belonged. His eyes, though. If you watched his eyes, and Nikki was watching, from the perimeter of the car park, in civilian clothes, with Favour beside her eating jerk chicken and looking, she hoped, completely casual, his eyes did not move with his smile. They moved with something else. Something cooler. Something that was always, even at the height of his warmth, measuring. Nikki watched him for 45 minutes. When he stepped off the stage and moved through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing, touching shoulders, she tracked his path. She saw the moment brief, unremarkable to anyone not watching for it, when he leaned close to a young man at the edge of the crowd. The young man was perhaps 22, wearing a yellow polo shirt, holding a paper cup. The exchange lasted 4 seconds. No envelope. No visible transaction. Just a word or a few words and a nod. The young man in the yellow polo shirt left the event immediately after. Nikki committed his face to memory. It was on the walk back to the car that Kezia found her. Or rather, Kezia was there, sitting on the low concrete wall at the edge of the car park, in school uniform, a Saturday, which was unusual, watching the event with an expression entirely different from everyone else's. Everyone else's face was turned toward the stage, toward the councillor's words, toward the music and the food and the spectacle. Kezia's face was turned toward the back of the crowd, toward the place where the young man in the yellow polo shirt had been standing. Nikki sat beside her on the wall. Didn't identify herself immediately. Just sat. The way you sit when you want someone to feel that the space is not a threat. After a minute, Kezia said, very quietly, not looking at her, "You a detective, nah?" Which is to say, you're a detective, aren't you? Nikki said yes. Kezia said, be careful who you trust around here. She said it the way a young person says something they've been holding for a long time, not dramatically, not with flourish, but with the weight of something that has been pressing on her from the inside and has finally found one small opening to pass through. Then she stood up, straightened her school uniform, and walked away into the crowd. Nikki let her go. You don't hold a bird like that in your hand. Not yet. You wait. You let it decide to come back. Act 3. Judgment Night. Scene 9. The venue, the sound, the preparation. Blaze Machete was not his real name, of course. His real name was Carlton Ferreira, from Spanish Town, and he was 27 years old, and he had in the past 36 months done what very few people in the compressed, competitive, brilliantly brutal world of Jamaican dancehall managed to do. He had risen. From a youth who had been recording himself on his phone in a Spanish Town yard and posting to social media, from a first rhythm feature on a small label out of Portmore, from a sound clash performance at a district party where he had the crowd in a frenzy for 22 unbroken minutes, through all of that to a position where his name on a flyer meant something. Where promoters in Kingston and Montego Bay and in the diaspora in South Florida and the Bronx were talking about Blaze Machete as a real article. He did not know, could not have known, that the Judgment Night event at the Crescent Pen community grounds, organized under his name and brand, was funded in part through channels that had nothing to do with ticket sales. He did not know that the event, from the perspective of at least 3 of the people who had arranged it, served a purpose entirely separate from the music. He did not know that a man named Cecil Pinky Brown, who would be in the crowd that night, who had agreed 3 days earlier to meet with Nikki the following morning, who knew the exact routing by which the guns in those crates had moved from the annex of New Jerusalem Tabernacle to the street. He did not know that Pinky had been identified as a problem. And problems in Crescent Pen District were resolved with a specific and terrible efficiency. The community grounds were a wide, flat expanse of packed earth at the bottom of the district's natural slope, a bowl of land that collected both drainage and, on nights like this, sound. The sound system arrived at 4 in the afternoon on 2 flatbed trucks. The towers, the subwoofers, the mid-range cabinets, the mixer, the cables wound on drums, the generator to supplement the grid connection. The selectors, 3 of them, working in rotation, arrived with their record bags and their laptops and their particular kind of focused pre-show energy, checking levels, calibrating, speaking in the technical dialect of their craft. By 6 o'clock the bass could be felt 2 streets away. By 8 o'clock there were 4,000 people on those grounds. Now, you must understand what a proper Jamaican dance is, and I use the word dance in its full Jamaican meaning, which is not merely an event where people move to music, but something closer to a gathering of the full self. A communion. A theater. A place where, for the hours it lasts, the pressures of the daily world, the bills, the scarcity, the indignity. The weight of being alive and poor and extraordinary and overlooked in a country that contains more talent per square mile than almost anywhere on earth. All of that is suspended, held at bay by the base, by the movement of bodies, by the communal agreement that, right now, in this moment, we are magnificent. That is what a dance is. And that is what made it the perfect cover. Because in a crowd of 4,000 bodies moving to music that registers in the chest, in the bones, in the floor of the lungs, in that crowd, certain things become invisible. Certain exchanges happen in the ordinary dark between bodies that no camera catches, no eye follows. Nikki and Fabe arrived at 9:15. They came in civilian clothes, separately, entering through different access points. Nikki wore a dark green dress and had let her hair down, a transformation that cost her a specific kind of self-consciousness that she tucked away because there was work to do. She had a concealed service weapon and an earpiece on a secure channel to Fabe. She found her way into the crowd and let the crowd receive her. She was looking for Pinky Brown. Scene 10. The dance, the dark, the last song. Blaze Machete took the stage at 10:45 and the crowd erupted. He came out in a white vest and dark jeans, a gold chain at his neck, moving with the specific ease of a man who has learned, and it is something learned, not given, to inhabit a stage the way water inhabits a container, completely, without resistance, filling every dimension. He opened with his biggest rhythm feature, the one that had been on the radio for 3 months and that every person in that crowd knew every word of. The selector dropped it and the crowd's response was, there is no clean translation for what 4,000 people do when the right song drops at the right moment in a dance. The sound that comes up from a crowd in that moment is not applause. It is something older and more animal than applause. It is the sound of collective recognition, of a community saying, yes, this, us. Nikki was moving through the left side of the crowd, working toward the section near the second generator shed where she had been told, by a source she was protecting, that Pinky usually positioned himself at dances near the exit, near a fixed structure, with lines of sight in multiple directions. The habits of a careful, small-time man who had survived this long by never being fully exposed. She saw him at 11:05. Cecil Pinky Brown was 41 years old and had the compact, economical frame of a man who had once been athletic and had since traded the athleticism for the more useful asset of inconspicuousness. He was called Pinky because of a scar that ran across the back of his right hand from a machete incident in his 20s. The scar was pale against his dark skin, pinky pale, and the name had stuck the way names stick in Jamaican communities, with the permanence of a fact. He was standing where she had been told he'd be. He had a red stripe beer in one hand. He was watching the stage, or appearing to watch the stage. There was a tension in his shoulders that the casual observer would miss, but that Nikki read immediately as the tension of a man who is not truly watching anything, but is instead listening to everything around him. She began to work her way toward him through the crowd. It took 6 minutes. 6 minutes of moving through the bodies, past the dancers, past the vendors who circulated even at the height of the performance with their trays of cigarettes and candy and phone charger cables, past the young men who were watching the crowd the same way Nikki was watching the crowd except with different purposes. She was 15 feet away from Pinky Brown when Blaze Machete dropped the second song. And in the surge of the crowd that followed, in the one moment when 4,000 bodies all moved simultaneously toward the stage in communal ecstasy, she heard it. Even over the music. Even over the bass that lived in the bones and the crowd sound that was half human, half force of nature. She heard it because she had been listening for that specific register of sound her whole professional life. It is not music punctuates the music, with panic, with the terrible intelligence of 4,000 bodies suddenly trying to be somewhere else simultaneously. Nikki was moving before she had consciously decided to move. Through the surge. Against it. Toward the generator shed. Pinky Brown was on the ground. He was on the ground, and he was still, and the red stripe bottle had shattered beside him, and the crowd was in full panic around him, and she was kneeling beside him, and she knew before she confirmed it, that Cecil Pinky Brown was dead. In her earpiece, Fabe's voice, breathless. Nikki, what happened? I lost visual on you. She came up from her knees and scanned. The crowd was fragmenting. The music had stopped. Blaze Machete was off the stage, hustled away by handlers who knew that whatever had just happened, a stage was not where you wanted to be. Screaming from the south end of the grounds. The beam of a flashlight cutting through the dark near the perimeter fence. She saw him. A figure moving quickly along the fence line. Not running, which would attract attention, but moving with the specifically purposeful fast walk of someone who has done what they came to do and is now executing the departure. Dark clothes. A cap pulled low. She went after him. He was good. Whoever he was very good. He knew the grounds, he knew the gap in the fence on the western boundary, the narrow path through the brush beyond it, the way out that was not the way anyone else was going. He had planned this, and she had not, and that gap in preparation cost her 40 seconds and 40 seconds. When you are chasing someone who knows where they are going, is everything. She reached the gap in the fence and pushed through it and was in the dark brush on the other side, and she could hear footsteps fast now. He was running now, and she ran, and the brush grabbed at her, and her dress was wrong for this. Everything was wrong for this. And then a vehicle, a car she had not seen, parked on the back road with its lights off. Engine. Headlights. Gone. She stood on the back road in the dark with her weapon out and the car's taillights shrinking around a bend and the sounds of the panicking dance ground carrying over the bush behind her. She had not seen the plate. It was too dark, and she had been too far behind, and the plate had been, she was almost certain, covered. She stood there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which she was not a detective, but simply a woman standing on a dark road in a dress in the hot August night with the smell of cordite, still registering somewhere in her senses, and a dead man behind her who had been about to tell her everything. Then she was a detective again. Scene 11. What happened to Fabe? Fabe was not answering his earpiece. She had been calling for 4 minutes. Walking back through the gap in the fence, through the chaos of the grounds, police from the local station already arriving, sirens cutting blue light through the dark, trying to raise him. Nothing. Static. She found him 20 minutes later, behind the food vendor stalls on the northern perimeter. He was sitting against the wall of the vendor enclosure, one knee drawn up, one hand pressed against the left side of his face. His earpiece was gone, pulled out, or knocked out. His shirt was torn at the collar. His bottom lip was split. 3 of them, he said when she crouched beside him. They had come at him from 3 sides simultaneously, which told you something about the planning involved. They had made him, identified him, positioned themselves, and then done it quickly and efficiently, the way you do something that you have done before, or been trained to do, or both. They had beaten him with enough controlled violence to incapacitate without causing injuries that would require hospitalization, and therefore a formal report that would become public record. That is not the work of bad men acting wild, that is the work of bad men acting intelligent, which is, as the old people say, a far more dangerous category. They had taken his badge. A message. Not evidence of who he was, they already knew who he was. A message. That they knew who he was, that they could reach him anywhere, that his identity as a police officer was in their hands, that next time the calculus of what they chose to do with him might run differently. Fabe told her this with the steady, controlled voice of someone who is managing pain and shock through sheer professional habit. He told her, and she listened, and she catalogued everything he said, and she made sure his injuries were assessed, and she sat beside him against the vendor wall with the chaos of the aftermath of a murder at a dance swirling around them. And she was very quiet for a long moment. Then she said, and she said it quietly, in the voice she used when something had reached past the professional and touched the personal, she said, "You all right, Fabe?" And he looked at her, this young man with his split lip and his missing badge and his evening of violence, and he said, "Yeah, man. I all right." He said it the way Jamaican people, in particular Jamaican men from communities where saying otherwise has never been a viable option, say they are all right when they absolutely mean it with everything they have left, and are not certain whether what they have left is enough. It was enough. Barely, but enough. Scene 12. The investigation nearly collapses. The 3 days that followed Judgment Night were the hardest of the investigation. Superintendent Bent called her into his office the morning after and laid it out plainly, which is to say, he laid out the version of plainly that corrupt men use, which contains the truth dressed in the language of institutional concern. He said, 2 deaths, a public incident at a major community event, a detective assaulted. He said, the division was under scrutiny. He said, the community angle, the church angle, was, now more than ever, something that required the most careful handling. He said that he was reassigning the primary murder investigation, both murders, Dessie Taylor and Cecil Brown, to a team from the Major Crimes Unit at the regional headquarters. He said Nikki could continue in a supporting capacity. She understood exactly what that meant. Supporting capacity. It meant she would be given just enough access to keep her from raising a formal objection and close enough to nothing meaningful that she could not build on what she had. It meant the case would now be run by people who operated within channels that Bent controlled. She did not object. Not openly. She thanked him and she left and she went to her car and she called the one person she trusted absolutely who was not inside this system, her cousin Marcia, who worked as a paralegal in Kingston and who had, over years of Nikki's career, become her most reliable external reality check. She told Marcia what she had and what she suspected and what she was about to do, and she said, if anything happens to me in the next 10 days, this information goes to a journalist. Marcia said, what kind of anything? Nikki said, any kind. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Marcia said, all right. That call was the safety net. It was the thing that let her keep walking forward. Because the specific courage that investigating corruption requires is not physical courage, though that has its demands too, as Fabe's split lip could confirm, but the courage of continuing to move when everything official is arranged to stop you. When the institution whose authority you operate under is itself the problem. When the floor you're standing on is the thing you are trying to expose. She kept moving. Act 4. Building the case from the bones up. Scene 13. The connection. The connection between the church, the politician, and the guns came together on a Tuesday morning in Nikki's personal notebook, the one that never went into the system, through a combination of forensic accounting and what detectives sometimes call the logic of the impossible. The logic of the impossible works like this. When you have eliminated every explanation that makes official sense, what remains, however unlikely it appears on the surface, is where the truth lives. New Jerusalem Tabernacle's public financial filings, churches registered as charities in Jamaica are required to file annual statements, showed revenues from tithes and offerings that, when Nikki set them against the congregation size and the average giving capacity of a working-class district, were implausible. Not impossible. Not obviously fabricated. But implausible in the way that a man who earns a laborer's wage showing up with a new car every year is implausible. The numbers worked on paper. They just didn't work in reality. The The difference between what 400 working families could realistically tithe and what the church reported receiving required an explanation. The explanation was a series of anonymous donations, large, round number, cash contributions recorded as community giving. Untraceable by design. Now, Councillor Drummond's campaign finance filings, available through the Electoral Commission of Jamaica, showed a similar pattern. Her declared campaign expenditures were fully funded. Her declared income sources were legitimate. But the timeline of certain major donations to her campaign, a community trust, a development foundation, a constituency improvement fund, aligned with a precision that was not coincidental. With periods of high activity in the ganja network that Nikki was now able to partially map. The network ran beneath Brother Marcus's legal farm like a false floor beneath a legitimate building. Someone, and the evidence was pointing toward who, had constructed a distribution operation that used the geography and the legitimacy of Marcus's licensed herb operation as cover and camouflage. Not on Marcus's land. On the land adjacent to it. The church's back acreage, which appeared in property records as grounds under development for community use, but accessible through a connection point that, from any angle of aerial or surveillance view, looked indistinguishable from the licensed farm next door. It was elegant, in the way that only a corruption that has been carefully, patiently constructed over years can be elegant. And if, when the investigation came, as it had now, in the form of Nikki and Favour, if the authorities were looking for someone to pin it on, the most available candidate, the one with the most obvious surface connections, the one with a documented cannabis operation literally next door. Brother Marcus Tafari. She was sitting in her car outside her apartment building at 11 at night when she understood this. When the full shape of it became clear to her, the way a picture in a fog becomes clear not gradually but suddenly, one moment obscured, the next moment unmistakable. She said nothing out loud. She just sat with it. She had, in her career, encountered many forms of human ingenuity deployed in the service of harm. But this, the deliberate construction of an innocent man as a future scapegoat, not as an afterthought, but as part of the original design. This made something move in her chest that she did not usually permit. She permitted it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she picked up her notebook and started writing. Scene 14. Brother Marcus is arrested. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning, 9 days after Judgment Night, and it happened fast, the way things happen fast when they have been planned in advance by people with the authority to make them happen. A team from the Major Crimes Unit arrived at Brother Marcus's farm at 6:45 in the morning, which was exactly the time when Marcus was always in his field, which told Nikki, who heard about it from Constable Pert within the hour, that whoever organized the timing knew his habits. They executed a search warrant on the farm and on the adjacent church property simultaneously. On the church property, in the storage annex, the one with the heavy padlock, they found processed ganja, a substantial quantity, packaged for distribution. And on Brother Marcus's property, in the shed at the back of the license section where he stored his harvesting equipment, they found a smaller quantity, planted. Now, the word planted is a serious word. It is a word that carries within it the specific weight of institutional violence, the violence of a state apparatus used against an innocent person by the people who are supposed to protect that person. It is, in the taxonomy of corruption, one of the worst acts available because it doubles the crime. It commits the injury of the plant, and it perverts the justice that should remedy the injury. Nikki was certain it was planted, because she had been in that shed. She had stood in it 3 days earlier, when Marcus had shown her his equipment in response to a question she had asked about his harvesting schedule. She knew what was in that shed. She knew exactly what was in that shed, and what was in that shed 3 days ago and what the search team now reported finding were not the same. Brother Marcus Tafari was arrested on his own land at 7:15 in the morning and was taken in handcuffs past his herb rows, past the breadfruit trees at the boundary, past the chain-link fence, past the space where 39 years of honest work and careful living had not been enough. He did not resist. He went with a dignity that, if you had been there to witness it, and Kezia was, watching from the doorway of the small wooden house, her hand pressed flat against the door frame, would have broken something in you. He went like a man who has read the scriptures and understands that the righteous are not always protected from the storm, only seen through it. As they put him in the vehicle, he turned his head, just once, briefly, and looked toward the house. Toward Kezia. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. The look said, "Tell the truth. Whatever you know, tell it." Scene 15. Kezia speaks. She came to Nikki that same evening. Came to the subdivisional headquarters, which took courage that Nikki would think about for a long time afterward, because a 19-year-old girl from a district where the police have historically been something between an irrelevance and an active threat, walking through the front door of a police station to offer testimony, that is not a small thing. That is a terrifying thing made possible only by the specific conviction that telling the truth, right now, for the man she loved most in the world, is more important than the fear. Nikki interviewed her in a side room, without anyone else present, with a female constable sitting quietly in the corner as required by procedure. Kezia sat very straight in the plastic chair, and she spoke carefully, and she did not cry, though Nikki could see the effort that not crying cost her. What Kezia had seen. 3 months ago, a night when she could not sleep, this was a recurring thing for Kezia, who had always been a light sleeper whose mind, in the small hours, went to places that required careful management. She had been outside, sitting on the step of the house in the yard, past midnight. She had seen the vehicles on the back road. The ones Marcus had mentioned, the large ones, moving slowly. She had seen them more clearly than her grandfather, because she had been outside, ground level, and had watched from the shadow of the breadfruit tree at the fence boundary. She had seen men moving between the vehicles and the annex at the back of the church. Carrying things. Crates. Working without lights, but there was enough ambient light, the moon, a far street lamp, the glow of a phone screen once, for her to see. She had seen Desmond Taylor. Desi. She had known him. Everyone in Crescent Pen had known Desi. He was there that night, one of the men working, carrying, moving crates from the vehicles to the annex. And she had seen who was directing it. Standing back from the work, overseeing, unhurried, a large man in a pale shirt, whose face she had seen clearly in the brief sweep of a vehicle's reversing lights. Pastor Conrad Levy. She had seen him, and she had stood absolutely still in the shadow of the breadfruit tree for 17 minutes until the vehicles were gone, and the annex was locked and the back road was empty. And then she had gone inside and lain down on her bed and stared at the ceiling and understood, with the cold clarity of a young person who grew up in a district where this knowledge is sometimes acquired very young, what it meant, what she had seen. And what would happen to her if she said anything? She had said nothing. For 3 months she had carried this like a stone in her chest. And then Desi was dead behind the church, and then the dance, and then her grandfather in handcuffs past his herb rows, and the stone had become something she could no longer carry without it crushing her. Nikki listened to all of this without a single interruption. When Kezia finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Nikki said, "You are very brave." Kezia shook her head, not in disagreement, but in the way of someone who doesn't trust praise right now, who needs utility more than affirmation. She said, "What you going to do with it?" Nikki said, "Everything I can." Scene 16. Above Ben's head. She had been building toward this for 2 weeks. The contact at the anti-corruption branch, the Inspectorate Division, which operated with a separation from local divisional command that existed precisely for situations like this, was a detective inspector named Sandra Ming, whom Nikki had met at a training seminar 3 years prior and had kept in careful, infrequent contact with since. Not because she had anticipated needing her, specifically, but because Nikki Campbell had understood, since early in her career, that there would come a day when she needed an ally who was not inside the machinery she was trying to document. She met Di Ming at a patty shop in Kingston on a Saturday morning, in plain clothes, in a booth at the back, with the specific air of two women having a casual meal who were, in fact, conducting the most consequential professional conversation of Nikki's career. She laid everything on the table: the firearms trace, the shipping manifest, the church finances, the campaign funding pattern, the plantation evidence, Kezia's witness account, the dance, Pinky's death, Fabe's beating, and Bent, the diversion of the case, the careful instruction, the reassignment to a team operating under his sphere of influence, the 15-year whisper that Nikki had heard from 4 separate sources in 4 separate conversations, each of which independently pointed to Superintendent Rohan Bent as a man who operated in the long, comfortable shadow of people whose interests required him there. Di Ming listened. She ate her patty. She asked 6 questions, precisely 6, each one surgical, and Nikki answered each one with everything she had. At the end, Di Ming was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "This is enough to open a formal inquiry." She said it carefully, with the measured weight of a professional who understands that enough to open and enough to close are separated by an enormous distance, and that the distance between them is filled with risk and time and the possibility of catastrophic failure. But enough to open. It was the first time in 2 weeks that Nikki exhaled completely. She did not celebrate. She did not allow herself that. Because in her experience, the moment you begin to celebrate the opening of a door is precisely the moment the door swings shut on your fingers. She drove back to Crescent Pen. She had work to do. Act 5 Climax. The net closes and what it catches. Scene 17. The arrests begin. The anti-corruption branch moved with a speed that Di Ming had warned Nikki to expect, that when the ACB moves, it moves decisively, because speed is the only defense against the thing that institutional corruption does when it feels itself discovered, which is collapse inward, destroy evidence, and reshape the narrative. 3 days after the patty shop meeting, warrants were issued. The first arrest was Superintendent Rohan Bent. He was taken at the divisional headquarters at his own desk, in his own building, in the corner office with the window looking out over the car park, by a team of 4 officers from the ACB who arrived without advance notice at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning. Now, you must understand that the arrest of a superintendent of police is not a routine thing. It is an event that moves through a police building the way a current moves through water, invisible in its medium, but felt by everything it passes through. Nikki was in her office when it happened. She had been told it would happen. She had positioned herself carefully at her desk, working, doing nothing that could be interpreted as participation in or celebration of the event, because she understood that in the politics of institutional accountability, the moment of someone's ruin is not your moment. It belongs to the truth and to the process, and you are simply the person who refused to stop finding it. She heard him pass in the corridor. She heard the sound of the escort, the lowered voices, the specific acoustic of a large man walking with people who have authority over him and know it. She did not look up from her desk. She did not need to. Bent was taken on charges of misconduct in public office, obstruction of justice, and receiving corrupt payments. The last charge supported by 3 years of bank records that the ACB forensic accountants had obtained and reviewed with a thoroughness that had clearly been applied to a case they considered worth their full attention. The payments had come through an intermediary account. The intermediary account traced, through 3 layers, to a company connected to New Jerusalem Tabernacle's financial network. The thread that Nikki had been following had pulled the whole cloth. Scene 18. The church confrontation. Pastor Conrad Levy was not at home when the ACB team went to his residence. He was at New Jerusalem Tabernacle. He was, and this detail matters deeply, he was at New Jerusalem Tabernacle conducting a midweek prayer meeting. 47 members of his congregation were in the hall when the ACB arrived, accompanied by Nikki and Favour, who had been authorized to participate in the apprehension. The prayer meeting was in progress. Someone was at the keyboard playing a slow, searching worship song, the kind of music that seems to address itself to the ceiling and through the ceiling to whatever is above it. The kind of music that sounds like it has been trying to say something important and hasn't yet found the right words. Nikki walked through the doors of New Jerusalem Tabernacle and down the central aisle with 3 ACB officers behind her and Favour to her left, Favour, who had a bruise on his face that had gone from blue to yellow in the 12 days since Judgment Night, and who walked with the specific uprightness of a young man who intends to be remembered as having been upright when it mattered. Pastor Levy saw them coming from the pulpit. He saw them, and this is the thing about him that will stay with everyone who was there, that will be talked about in Crescent Pen district for years. He did not flinch. He did not run. He did not collapse. He straightened. He straightened and he looked at Nikki as she came down the aisle with the composed, armored look of a man who has been performing a character for so long that, in the moment of its exposure, he does not know how to stop performing it. The keyboard player stopped playing. The congregation went still with the held-breath stillness of people who understand, instinctively, that something irrevocable is about to happen in this space. Nikki stopped at the foot of the pulpit steps. She said his name. His full name, calmly, in the tone that is required by procedure and that in this context, in a church, at a pulpit, in front of 47 of his people, carried a weight that no other context could have given it. She told him he was being arrested on charges including conspiracy to import illegal firearms, possession of prohibited weapons, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy in connection with the deaths of Desmond Taylor and Cecil Brown. The congregation made a sound that was not quite a sound, more the collective intake of breath that precedes a sound, held suspended, not released. Pastor Conrad Levy looked at Nikki for a long, long moment. And then at last, after 52 years of performance and 2 of criminal empire and 4 of preaching over both, the face shifted. Not dramatically. Not with tears or outrage or collapse. Just a subtle, terrible settling the way a face settles when the effort of maintaining the architecture of a lie is finally, definitively stopped. He said quietly enough that only those at the front of the hall could hear. He said, "All of us go meet Jah eventually." As though, even now, he was addressing a congregation. As though scripture was still the last language available to him. He came down from the pulpit, and he was handcuffed, and he was walked back up the aisle he had walked in triumph for 4 years, and the congregation parted for him. And the red roof tiles of New Jerusalem Tabernacle blazed in the late afternoon sun above them all, and the keyboard player began to cry. Scene 19. Councillor Drummond's world collapses. Councillor Yvette Drummond's arrest was handled differently because she was an elected official and because the Electoral Commission and the Director of Public Prosecutions were involved, and because the ACB wisely wanted every procedural formality observed with surgical precision, knowing that her lawyers would examine every millimeter of the process for grounds of challenge. She was notified to attend the ACB office voluntarily. She arrived with 2 lawyers and a composure that, to anyone watching, would have seemed extraordinary. She was dressed in the way she was always dressed for public moments, impeccably, deliberately, with the careful sartorial signaling of someone who understands that appearance is a form of argument. And in the room, the formal interview room of the anti-corruption branch, not a room designed for comfort or for the management of illusions, they sat her down in front of the evidence. The financial records, the campaign funding traces, the communications, texts, emails, and 2 recorded phone calls obtained under warrant that connected the constituency development funding to the ganja network. Now, you must understand what happened in Yvette Drummond in that room. It was not the fear that broke her composure. It was not the lawyers watching, or the camera in the corner, or the formal charge sheet placed on the table. It was the evidence of the clinic. Among the financial records was the full trail of the health clinic funding, the clinic she had built, the clinic that was real, the clinic that had delivered over 300 babies and managed 2,000 consultations in 4 years. The full trail. And the trail showed, clearly and without ambiguity, that the money for the clinic, the foundation of her community legacy, the thing she had told herself justified all the rest, had come, indirectly, laundered through 2 charitable vehicles, from the same network. The clinic was built on the drug trade. It was real. And it was built on poison. And in that room, in that moment, Yvette Drummond, who had genuinely, sincerely, completely believed in herself as a woman doing necessary good by complicated means, understood what she had actually done. The composure went slowly, the way things go when they have been maintained by great effort over a long time. Not dramatically. A stillness first. Then a slight change in breathing. Then the hands, which had been folded on the table with practiced calm, unfolded and came together differently, fingers interlaced, pressing, the physical language of someone holding themselves together. She said to her lawyer, not to the investigators, in a voice emptied of everything except the last available truth, she said, "I thought I was doing right." Silence in the room. The investigator across from her said, "We know." And that was, somehow, the most devastating thing anyone said to Yvette Drummond in that entire terrible day. Because we know is not absolution. It is the exact opposite of absolution. It is the acknowledgement that your belief in your own righteousness has been examined and found to be real, and that it changed nothing about the harm you caused. Scene 20. Kezia's testimony and the light on Marcus. Brother Marcus Tafari had been in custody for 11 days when Kezia's formal sworn statement was entered into the record. 11 days. In those 11 days, he had been held at the remand facility, and by every account of the constables and officers who processed him and interacted with him during those days, he had been, and this word was used by 3 different people independently, which tells you something about how it registered. He had been peaceful. Not passive. Not broken. Peaceful. There is a difference, and it is a difference that requires a certain quality of inner life to sustain in circumstances designed to undo it. He had prayed. He had read. He had spoken to the other men in the facility with the same unhurried, interested attention with which he had worked his herb rose. He had eaten what was given and slept when it was time for sleeping. He had waited. Because Brother Marcus Tafari had lived long enough and hard enough and close enough to the ground of Jamaican reality to know that truth, in this place, does not arrive quickly. That truth here is something you have to outlast the system to receive. Kezia's statement was corroborated, partially, and in the specific way that forensic evidence corroborates eyewitness testimony when the eyewitness is telling the truth, by physical evidence from the ACB's examination of the church annex. The annex had been used for storage of contraband. This was now established. The distribution operation under the church's back acreage was established. The plant on Marcus's property, the evidence against him, was established as fraudulent through the timeline, through the absence of Marcus's biological trace on the packaging material, and through the testimony of Kezia, who placed Pastor Levy at the scene of the original contraband movement on the night she had witnessed. The charges against Brother Marcus Tafari were withdrawn on a Friday afternoon. He was released at 4 in the afternoon. Kezia was waiting outside the facility gates. She was standing in the light that comes at that particular hour of a Jamaica afternoon, the late, gold, generous light that is different from the morning's gold, older and softer and carrying within it the accumulated warmth of the whole long day. And when he came through the gates, she didn't run to him. She walked. Measured, deliberate, the way she had approached the police station to give her statement, with the full weight of her intention in every step. He opened his arms and she walked into them, and they stood there in the late light without speaking for a long time, the old man and his granddaughter, while the world conducted its ordinary business around them. When they separated, Marcus looked at her for a moment. He said, in the formal, gentle, Rasta way of blessing someone whose courage has been witnessed, "God bless you, Pickney," which is, "God bless you, child." She said, "Come, grandfather. Let us go home." Scene 21. Bent tries to run. Superintendent Rohan Bent attempted to run. This is worth spending a moment on, because the manner of his attempt tells you something essential about the specific psychology of a man who has lived inside corruption for 15 years and has come to believe, somewhere beneath the conscious calculations, that he is untouchable. He was out on bail, not uncommon for a first-time detainee of his professional standing, the lawyers having argued successfully for bail pending the early stages of the ACB investigation, and he had been required to surrender his passport, which he had done, and had been ordered not to leave the jurisdiction, which condition he apparently considered more advisory than binding. He had a second passport. Not a forged document. A real one, a legitimate Jamaican passport issued in a name he had been maintaining as a reserve identity for 8 years, a level of preparation that tells you, more clearly than any other evidence, that Bent had always known this day might come and had always been arranging a door. He was identified at the Sangster International Airport in Montego Bay at 6 in the morning by an airport security officer who had received, the night before, an updated watch list communicated through channels that bypassed the divisional police structure, a precaution the ACB had taken specifically because they understood the risk of Bent being tipped off through his own network. He was intercepted at the departure gate. He was carrying a single bag. He had left everything else. 33 years of a career, a house in a good neighborhood, a pension, a title, the uniform, all of it left behind. He was taken back to Kingston. The second passport was added to the charge sheet. The flight he had been attempting to board, Nikki noted this when she saw the airport report, because she noted everything was bound for Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale, which is in Broward County, Florida, where Sandra K. Levy had been arrested, where the freight company was, where, Nikki now suspected with the cold certainty of a pattern fully revealed, the other end of the rope connected to people she would spend many more months finding. The thread was not finished. It never is. Scene 22. What the district knows and what it doesn't. Crescent Pen District processed the events of those 3 weeks in the way that communities process extraordinary events, not all at once, not with a single clean narrative, but in layers. Each layer revealing something different depending on who is doing the looking. At the rum bar on the curved main road, the arrests were discussed with the kind of detailed, impassioned analysis that most political commentary programs would benefit from. Old men with dominoes and red stripe argued the full genealogy of it, who had known about Pastor Levy and for how long, which signs had been there to read if you were paying attention. Me always know something wrong with that man. I always knew something was wrong with that man, was said by at least 4 people who, 6 months prior, had been in the first 3 rows of New Jerusalem Tabernacle every Sunday. This is not hypocrisy. This is survival intelligence. In communities where the powerful are often also the dangerous, where the line between a benefactor and a predator is made deliberately difficult to see, the development of retrospective clarity is a kind of communal self-protection. You revise the memory to incorporate the new truth. You update the record. You keep living. The women under the tent at the health center, Councillor Drummond's health center, still open, still running, because the staff who worked there had done nothing wrong and the babies who needed to be born there were not party to any corruption. Those women talked about Drummond with something more complicated than condemnation. They talked about her the way women in communities talk about a person whose failure is entangled with their own genuine need. The clinic was real. The road was real. The scholarships were real. And the thing that paid for them was poison. That contradiction, that real good built on real harm, does not resolve cleanly. It sits in the community like a stone in the river, permanent, the water always moving around it, never through it. The young activist, a man named Trevor Gordon, 24 years old, who had been organizing a youth development initiative in the district and who had been, in the weeks before the arrests, systematically harassed by elements connected to Levy's network who feared his organizing would disrupt their operations. Trevor Gordon emerged from those weeks with something changed in him. He had been in the political crossfire. He had taken real damage, his meetings disrupted, his phone receiving messages that were clearly designed to frighten him, a brick through a window of the community center where he organized. And yet, he was still there. After the arrests, he stood in front of the community center in the early morning, and he looked at the boarded-up window and he said, to no one in particular, or to the district in general, which amounts to the same thing. We still here. And we staying. Which is, perhaps, the most Jamaican sentence that has ever been said, in its precise combination of acknowledgement of damage and absolute refusal of defeat. Scene 23. Fabe after. Fabian Morris filed a full incident report about the approach from Deacon Ramsey and about the Friday evening gas station conversation. He filed it through the ACB's witness reporting channel, which meant it was protected from divisional interference. Deacon Neville Ramsey's case was complicated. The investigation into the gun importation established that the deacon had signed documents under circumstances that the ACB's assessment characterized as possible coercion and material withholding of information, meaning someone had put papers in front of a good man and made sure he didn't understand what he was signing, and then had an interest in keeping him useful and compliant. Whether the deacon had known or not known, and to what degree, was a question that would be answered in court. But the bribe approach, the Friday evening door opened precisely 2 inches. That was documented. That was in the record. And Fabe's willingness to document it, to file the report knowing that it would implicate a man with community connections, that it would be uncomfortable, that it would follow him in his career as the act of a man who chose the right thing over the easy thing. That willingness was the thing that settled the question Nikki had been carrying since the moment she asked him to keep the door open. The question of who Fabian Morris would be when it actually mattered. Now she knew. After he filed the report, he came to her desk and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "That wasn't easy, Corp." She looked at him and said, "The easy ones don't count." Closing narration. The light, the cracks, and what comes next. Scene 24 final. Nikki, standing in the morning. 3 weeks after the arrests. The morning came over Crescent Pen district the way it always did, red first, then gold. The solitaire bird called from the tree at the edge of Brother Marcus's farm. The rooster announced himself. Someone's radio played a gospel song from a house on Redemption Lane. The smell of wood smoke and salt and deep, dark earth. Nikki Campbell drove into the district at 6 in the morning. She came alone, without Fabe, in the Corolla with its broken air conditioning and its windows rolled down to receive the August air. She came for no official reason. There was no scheduled visit, no active witness meeting, nothing logged in the system. She came because, in 12 years of this work, she had learned that a place after a reckoning needs to be witnessed. Not processed. Not officially assessed. Witnessed. She parked on the main road, the one that curved in its long crescent arc through the heart of the community, and she walked. The Chinese shop was open already, the owner arranging stock in the pre-dawn quiet. A man on a bicycle nodded as he passed. Two women with water containers were at the standpipe at the corner of Redemption Lane and Mango Walk, talking quietly. Their voices carrying the particular morning voice quality of people who have learned to function in the hours before the day fully commits to itself. She walked up the hill to where New Jerusalem Tabernacle stood. The building was there. Of course it was. White walls. Red roof tiles. Gleaming still in the early sun, as though the walls had no knowledge of what had been conducted inside and beneath them, and in a sense, they didn't. The building was not the crime. Buildings are not the crimes of the people who build them. The congregation, 1,347 people who had prayed in this building in genuine faith, who had received genuine comfort from genuine worship in this space, those people were not the crime. The crime was always and specifically the man who had used faith as a costume, who had stood in the pulpit and spoken of righteousness from the same mouth that ordered violence, and had understood with perfect clarity the difference between the two and had made his choice. That choice was being answered now, in courtrooms, in the record. She stood at the front gate of the church for a moment and looked at it. Then she walked on, down the hill and around the back road, past the breadfruit trees, to Brother Marcus's farm. He was there. Of course he was. In his rows, moving with his hoe, the red cloth in his locks, the enormous hands, the unhurried authority of a man who has been at this work for 39 years and will be at it for as many more as his body and his God permit. He saw her coming and stopped, as he always did. She came to the fence line and leaned on it, and they looked at each other for a moment in the way that, after what they had both been through, required no preamble. She said, "How are you?" He said, after considering, in the way of a man who weighs his words the same way he weighs his herb. "I am well. The ground is still here. The plant stem still growing. Jaw still on him thrown." She nodded. Then he said, "And you, Detective Campbell?" She looked at the herb rows, at the morning light in them, at the long, ordered green of 3 acres of honest work. She said, "Still working." He nodded and went back to his rows, and she stayed at the fence for a minute longer, in the morning light, with the solitaire bird calling from the tree above her, and the distant bass finally silent, the last echo of Judgment Night finally dissolved into the air. Now, you must understand something before we close this chapter. The story does not end here. In truth, and truth is the only currency this narration trades in, the story has barely begun. 3 people are in custody. A corrupt superintendent awaits trial. An ambitious politician confronts the ruins of a public identity she spent 20 years building. A pastor sits in a remand cell with a Bible he has been reading as though he is encountering it for the first time. But the network, the deeper network, the one that connects the freight company in Miami to the guns in the speaker boxes, the ganja beneath the church to the campaign funds, the political machinery to the criminal one. That network is not 3 people. It never is. Nikki Campbell understood this as she walked back down the hill, past the Chinese shop, past the standpipe, to the Corolla with its broken air conditioning and its open windows. She understood that what she had cracked open was not the structure of the corruption. It was only the surface of it, the first layer, the part that was exposed enough to the light that it could not withstand the light. Below it were more layers, darker, more carefully insulated, protected by people with more power and more caution than Pastor Conrad Levy, than Yvette Drummond, than Rohan Bent. Protected by the specific, institutional weight of a system that has been doing this, using the poor, exploiting the faithful, corrupting the guardians, for so long that it has come to resemble not a criminal enterprise, but simply, the way things are. The way things are. That phrase is the most powerful tool that any corrupt system possesses. Because when the way things are becomes the expectation, it becomes invisible. It becomes weather. It becomes the thing you walk through every day without naming, because naming it is the first step to fighting it, and fighting it costs everything, and not everyone can afford the cost. But some people can. Some people grow up in Arnett Gardens and lose a brother to an uninvestigated killing and spend 12 years building the capacity and the patience and the specific, unbreakable refusal to accept that the way things are is the way they have to be. And those people, when they find themselves at the edge of something true and deep and dangerous, do not step back. They step forward. Nikki Campbell got into the Corolla. She set her notebook on the passenger seat, the private one, the one that never went into the system. She looked at the name she had written on the last page, the name that had come to her in the patty shop with D.I. Ming. The name that the Hialeah Firearms Trace and the Florida Freight Company and the Florida flight that Bent had been boarding had been pointing her toward, like 3 compass needles all oriented to the same north. A name she did not yet have a face to attach to. Not yet. She started the car. The August morning opened ahead of her, gold and merciless and full of what it had not yet given up. The solitaire bird called once more from Marcus's tree. And then the road. And the work. Always. The work. End of episode 1. Righteous Wolves. Babylon in a DI Fire, a Jamaican police story, season 1. Next episode. Episode 2, Roots and Ruins. Nikki follows the name from her notebook into the Florida connection. Original fictional work. All characters, events, institutions, and locations are products of the imagination. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.